yesterday on the campus of the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I went to rabbinical school, where we all went to rabbinical and cantorial school. There's three campuses. The main campus in Cincinnati, and then these other satellite campuses in New York and LA. Some synagogues recognize those ordinations too. Now, they're all good. They're all good. But yesterday on the Cincinnati campus, it was what they called Founders Day. Normally, it's a formality service. I think on the 4 years that I was in Cincinnati, I don't recall ever attending one of them. It wasn't something that people were particularly excited about, celebrating the founders who founded Hebrew Union College, along with Isaac Mayer Wise, 147 years ago. But yesterday was different. Yesterday, you couldn't get a seat. Yesterday, every single seat was taken, and the whole hallway was filled with overflow seating. Which is amazing, because when I was there, you couldn't pay anyone to go to it. It was so boring. But yesterday was a lot different. My recently retired Talmud professor, Dr. Mark Wachowski, gave a speech. He was the speaker. They have one of the professors speak every year, but this past year, I guess because he just retired, was his turn. And his speech is going viral on the web, at least amongst Reform rabbis. So in this case, viral, it's like 40 people, but that's a lot for us. When he was done speaking, he got a thunderous applause. Not just thunderous, but screaming and yelling and cheering that went on for several minutes. It was perhaps the most emotional speech in the history of Hebrew Union College's Founders Day. So what happened? What's going on right now that this speech was such a big deal in a spot that nobody really cares about that much? Well, tomorrow night, Rabbi Aklepi and I are going to San Diego for the conference of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the Reform Rabbis Conference. Rabbi Greengrass was going to go as well, but unfortunately, because of her mom's passing, she's not able to go with us. And at this conference, the president of HUC will be there, and he's going to discuss with us, the Reform Rabbinate, who are coming in from all over the world, why he and his board of governors are leaning towards closing the campus of Cincinnati at the Hebrew Union College and mandating that all ordinees for rabbinic ordination go only to the New York campus and the LA campus going forward. Now, when I was applying to rabbinical school, our first year for all of us is in Jerusalem, and when you're in Jerusalem, one day you get a letter in your mailbox, which is hardly a mailbox, but this little thing that's yours, and there's a letter and it tells you what campus you're going to go to next year. Now, I grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania. Nobody in northeastern Pennsylvania had ever been to Cincinnati. There were a few people who heard of it, or maybe went to like a Penn State game when they played Ohio State, but nobody ever really been there. So naturally, I requested, keep me in America, send me to New York. And then I got a letter one day, you're going to Cincinnati. I said, that went well. It turned out, though, it really worked out for me for two reasons. One, I don't know what I was thinking. There was nowhere in New York to play golf. And Cincinnati is a great golf town. And two, and almost important as number one, I met my wife in Cincinnati. So that worked out too. But there's now talk that the main campus, where Reform Judaism essentially was founded, in Cincinnati, that they're going to close this campus. Now, this isn't going to be popular, especially with the large number of rabbis, like myself, who are graduates of the Cincinnati campus, and all of the rabbis from the middle of the country, and this is something new that I've learned, they feel that they've been relegated to flyover status. Which means to say, when Jews are going from New York to LA, they fly over that other part of the country. And that the big institutions of Judaism, outside of maybe Chicago, no longer really seem to care or are investing in the middle of the country. And in fact, most of the Jewish communities in the middle of the country, sadly, are shrinking. Now, there's reasons for that. And it's not like the Jews are leaving the country or that they're not Jewish anymore. They're moving mainly to larger cities and primarily to the east and west coast. But it is having a devastating toll on on all synagogues in the middle of the country. The reality today, according to HUC, and I've been on a number of these calls with the president of HUC as a member of the CCR board, the reality is that not only is Midwestern Jewry shrinking, but that, and this is much more worrisome for me, applicants to the Reform Rabbinic School, to the Hebrew Union College, in the last 15 years, are down 60%. 60%, which means we're on the verge of having a real shortage of rabbis. Now, it makes us a lot more valuable. So, keep that in mind. But it's really scary. The numbers are not good. Not only that, there are these new rabbinic schools that are much less academically rigorous, where you can essentially become a rabbi online, and those rabbis are getting jobs. They're taking jobs away from HUC students. And they're going to rabbinical school much more cheaply than those of us who spent 5 years living in Jerusalem and Cincinnati or New York or LA. Now, all of these things are true. And the cost of keeping 4 campuses running, right, New York, Cincinnati, LA, and Jerusalem, when you have 60% less students, is very tough. Not only that, because congregations are shrinking, the dues that congregations like us pay to the Union for Reform Judaism that then get sent to the Hebrew Union College, the checks are coming in much, much smaller. And it's harder to pay faculty, and it's harder to recruit students, and it's harder to have programs, and we're losing a lot of applicants. Plus, it turns out that people aren't as interested in organized religion as they used to be. I'm not sure when that was that they used to be, but they aren't as much now as it was back then. Steps in Dr. Mark Wachowski, my recently retired Talmud professor, who has been on the campus of Cincinnati as a student and as a professor for 45 years. Standing at the bima in front of this very large crowd of people who are heartbroken to see what could happen to the Cincinnati campus, he stood up and said, we have the largest one of the largest Jewish libraries in the world, the second largest Jewish library in the United States. We have the American Jewish Archives, the largest Jewish archives in the world on this campus. We have our graduate studies programs right here on this campus. And the argument that the administration is making is, in order to remain academically rigorous and academically excellent at the highest possible standards, we need to close this campus and at the same time close the largest Jewish library, close the American Jewish Archives, and close the PhD program. So how is that maintaining academic excellence, he asks. And for that, he received a thunderous applause. Now, I'm not quite certain what the answer is. As a Cincinnati alum, I have fond feelings for the campus. To be honest, as a Floridian rabbi, I have little attachment to Midwestern Judaism. I did meet my wife in Cincinnati, and her family still lives in Ohio, but they're not Talmud scholars. They're not Jewish. That's why that's funny. My biggest concern right now is that what made Reform Judaism work, what made Reform Judaism famous, the innovation that we had that no one else had, was that 147 years ago, Isaac Mayer Wise didn't write a brilliant book about Torah. He didn't come up with a groundbreaking way of understanding how Torah works. He came up with a system for making Judaism work in a country where the Jews are spread out over a large geographic area. He came up with the idea for 3 institutions. One, the UAHC, which we now call the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, of which Temple Beth Am is a proud member and a flagship member. The CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, of which all of our rabbis are proud members and serve on a variety of their committees and boards. And the Hebrew Union College, a place where a vanguard of students could go to then go out and serve those congregations. What we were so great at, what Reform did better than anyone else, was to create these institutions that bound our movement together. We all had in common the same movement, the same rabbinic school, and the same rabbis. I remember, before I applied to rabbinic school, I didn't know much about it. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply to HUC, and let's see what other rabbinic school should I apply to? Well, what kind of rabbi do you want to be? Reform. Okay, you can apply to HUC, or you can apply to HUC. But don't worry, if you don't get in there, maybe my grandmother knew someone at JTS. So you'll be a conservative rabbi. That was the conversation. We all shared rabbis from the same college. This was what Isaac Mayer Wise brought us. But today it seems that our connection as a congregation, that the rank and file Reform member of a congregation cares very little about these movements, doesn't know much about them, couldn't tell you the difference between the president of HUC and the president of the URJ, or who the CEO of the CCAR is, or what these things stand for, or what they do, or why they're important. Today they're in decline. And while some of our members are very active, the overwhelming majority couldn't give you a rational explanation as to why our congregation pays hundreds of thousands of dollars annually to these organizations when we don't really use them or have much connection to what they do. I'm not so concerned about which campus rabbis study on. What I'm concerned about is what our connection is to these institutions. Our Torah portion this week is called Shemini. Shemini is the story of one of the most tragic stories in the Torah, in which the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, go to the Mishkan, to the recently completed tabernacle, and offer a sacrifice. The Torah tells us it's an Eish Zara, it's a strange fire, and immediately after, the fire comes, and it's so powerful that they're zapped, and they both die, and Aaron finds out that his 2 sons have just passed away. Now, the rabbis have many explanations as to what their real sin was. Why did Nadav and Avihu die? But the Torah doesn't. The Torah says simply that they died lifnei Hashem. They died before God. And that doesn't sound negative at all. That actually sounds positive. They died standing before God. And this was a day, the day that they died, it was a day that Aaron himself was told to bring a sin offering, to bring a calf. Why was Aaron supposed to bring a sin offering of a calf on the day that the Mishkan, that the tabernacle was being dedicated? Because he was still atoning for his role in the golden calf. So Aaron brings the calf, but no fire comes. What was supposed to happen was you put your offering on the altar and a fire from heaven would come down and consume the animal, but the fire never came. And then Moses entered the arena, and only when Moses came did the fire come down. And so Nadav and Avihu, the two sons, are looking behind saying, our father just went in there. He's supposed to be the high priest, and it didn't work. And what if this whole thing, what if the whole priesthood, what if it doesn't work? What if we don't inherit the priesthood? And so they went and they brought their own animal sacrifice, and what happened? It worked. The fire came down and it consumed the animal, and it consumed them too. They, unlike their father, get a response from heaven. So for the last 3,500 years, we've been talking about what was their sin, what did they do wrong, why did they get zapped? But from their perspective, they succeeded. They caused a divine response to the Kohanim, to the priesthood. They kept the priesthood alive. They kept the priesthood going. The family of Aaron was exonerated. And they will then go on and become the Kohanim, the priests, forever. And their job as the priests, they're the family that helps to hold the Jewish people together. They run the temple. They're the leaders. Nadav and Avihu were concerned not with themselves, but with the future. In fact, they give up their lives for the Jewish future, the future of our people. They wanted to preserve the priestly role of facilitating religious practice for the Jewish people. Hebrew Union College is concerned about the same thing. They too are looking right now to elicit a divine response from their actions in the form of rabbinic ordinations of those willing to dedicate their lives to the service of the Jewish people. Now, I'm not sure if closing the campus is the right thing to do or not. It might be. It might be the only way to remain solvent. It might not be. It might be a colossal mistake, as Dr. Wachowski was arguing. But what I do pray for right now is the day when our movement can rekindle the sparks that inspired Reformed Jews to share in the gifts of unity. I do care what happens to Midwestern Jewry, just as I care about the Jews on the West Coast, the Northeast, the South, and our home in Miami-Dade. It all matters. Our connection to each other matters. And right now, Reformed Jews are seeing its connection to the movement slip through its fingers. Yes, it is the responsibility of the movement to inspire and unite us, to do what Nadav and Avihu did, to stand up and say, we will cause a divine response to happen in your congregations. But if it seems like they're losing their connection, like maybe Aaron was, if it seems that they're not getting that divine response as Aaron didn't, then maybe we, like Nadav and Avihu, should see it as our job to take the initiative and remind our movement what it will take to re-inspire us and to unite us with Reformed Jews around the country and around the world. I don't know where the Hebrew Union College will end up, but I pray that they listen to Dr. Wachowski's warning, that they resist dilution and maintain academic excellence, that they recommit to producing rabbis and leaders who aren't afraid to step up like Nadav and Avihu and to commit themselves to the future of Jewish leadership and inspiration. I do pray that we remain linked with Jews, Reformed Jews, all across this country and all across this world. And I pray also that we look closely and see that where inspiration is lacking, it's our job to step forward like Nadav and Avihu and remind them what we and what our colleagues around the country need as well. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.